Thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is a lesson that I used to teach in my follow-up class to my first class. I think I'll Stampscaping 102 or something like that. In the first class, we kind of learned, I taught people how to stamp out a scene, how to compose something, and then how to utilize dye-based inks to kind of color a scene in. But then in Stampscaping 102, a really simple tweak on our color schemes that we've created in the first class was utilizing those value schemes and color schemes, whatever, that we colored our scene in, but using this more strategically to create space and depth within a scene, okay? And that's kind of treating our value scheme here, going from light colors to dark colors, to represent light within a scene, okay? And I always had people kind of line up their pads and line them up from going from light to dark, but this was not just for the purpose of adding inks, but in terms of strategic planning to create depth within that scene, or additional depth within that scene, was taking a look at our value scheme, whatever we choose to utilize, and seeing this scale as something from far to near, okay, or near to far, whatever way you want to look at it. So the darker colors within our value scheme represent something closer, and the lightest of colors represents something farthest away, okay? So in this color scheme that I'm using right here, those really distant trees are stamped out in Memento Summer Sky. Let's take a look at this right here. This medium brown, gray, sorry, was used for the midground in here, which are these the Pines and Rocks stamps and the Lakeside Cove, okay? And then the closest things right here are the reeds, right? And I stamp that out in black. And then what we do is we just color in the entire scene in the same methodology, and when you blend those colors over these multi-toned objects that were stamped out in those same colors, it will represent depth within a scene. You can do it with any kind of color scheme too. You can do it all blues for like a winter scene or something like that. It makes it look like a really chilly night, and things that you stamp in very light colors, mountains in the distance, trees, whatever, clouds, they look even farther away than when you utilize your black ink for only those things in the foreground. It really pushes the depth within a scene. So here's some other scenes right here stamped so far where I've mostly utilized very dark colors for, you know, my main objects. Okay, and this one right here I use some pens, but for the most part it's dark. Grayscale, similar grayscale of this one, right? This would be a good comparison right here. But this one kind of conveys more distance and depth within the scene, doesn't it? Just by utilizing those grays instead of stamping the objects in black. Black objects, blue color scheme. This one right here would be interesting too. See, my color scheme are these yellows, oranges, reds, magentas, okay? I could have stamped this object right here in red or something like that. I might have used some brown up here too. This one, I don't remember. But this could have been stamped down a light brown, and it would have kind of receded more, you know, with the illusion of depth through the use of value. So it would really push this one here. Dark, certainly dark here. Now that's not to say that you should always stamp out all of your objects, you know, in various values. I mean, in something like this, you know, I needed, you know, the contrast in here. I needed to stamp this out fairly dark for it to stand up against, you know, these really dark bars of, you know, the negative space around these aurora borealis light rays, okay? And, you know, certainly having this darker can contrast against this, but you can also, you know, change the whole look of this by creating a little bit of a different atmosphere. When you stamp things in lighter tones like that, it represents something that's in the air within the scene, or that's what it's, you know, giving the illusion of. We're giving the illusion of this is a kind of a foggier, atmospheric day, a lot of moisture in the air, so when the light comes down and bounces off that distant object and comes back to us in our eye, that light has broken up in all the little moisture, little droplets that are in the air, and those objects look lighter in the distance. And I think it creates a kind of a stronger mood. It might not be as dramatic, but it has a different mood to it. So, and what I mentioned in this video later on is I'll actually be doing some additive techniques on here using color box, pigment ink, and I'll add in some things that represent fog. So something like this will seem more atmospheric and foggier when I actually do some foggy things, but just by stamping out something lighter like that, it gives the illusion of kind of that fog or moisture in the air without having to do anything, without having to add anything extra in terms of things like the white pigment ink or some gel pen dots and marks and whatnot. Okay, anyways, it's a good exercise, a fun one too. It used to be the first thing that I would do in my second class. I think it was the second thing that I would do in a 3-hour class after they've stamped their initial scenes out in the beginning class. So anyways, you're getting kind of a little portion of my Stampscaping 102 class in this one right here. It's a really easy exercise, and it just kind of creates this option for you to take a look at your stamps and to really push their usage in a different way to create depth just by changing the ink that you use. It's kind of a fun, different type of look in the end result. So anyways, hope you enjoy the video if you choose to watch it, and thanks as always for tuning into the channel. Okay, let's try to create some depth and atmosphere in our scenes. This is a kind of a method that I'm quite fond of, and it used to be something that I used to teach in my follow-up to my Stampscaping 101 class. I still see it as a beginning technique because it's doing the same type of thing, but it's just playing around with our color scheme a little bit. Alright, now, one of the things that is really easy to do as far as choosing the colors that you're going to use in this type of exercise is just to choose, and it doesn't have to be the same brand, but choosing kind of a range of dye-based inks within the same hue, okay? So you're picking out different values of a given hue. This one's just using some brown tones, and we have this beige, kind of a medium tone brown and a darker brown. You can do something like that. With blues, it's really easy to do too. A lot of people have at least 3 different values of blue. We have light blue, medium blue, darker blue. You can do it in grayscale. This Memento looks about the same value as this Marvy Gray, but it's a little bit lighter. Just, I know that from usage. And here's black, so it's going to kind of going in just a straight grayscale. We can mix in other tones, which I'll do in this scene. I think I'm going to do it in a kind of a cool gray tone color scheme. So you just have to kind of lay things out, and what you think is roughly the lightest to darkest, and you just have to kind of line them up. And we'll utilize those in order. But one of the things about seeing these ranges of values in whatever given hue that you're working in is it's seeing them in terms of values. These are colors to be added, but if you kind of think about them in terms of light, the way a photographer sees capturing light, in the camera or on film or whatever, things that are reflected off of objects and brought back to the eye, it's not really the image, it's the light that's being reflected off of these objects, okay? Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing with these different values here is we're going to be utilizing this to our advantage in depicting kind of mood and kind of the weather, atmosphere of a given setting through the values that you've already laid out. And one of the things that I'd always recommend is kind of picking things out and really doing that thing, laying them out, mixing and matching if you don't have things in the same brand. All right, and that's what we'll do here. Well, I have some Mementos and some Marvy pads right here. But go ahead and mix and match. And one of the things about making things visual like this and picking them out is you can see things from a visual standpoint. It doesn't have to be theoretical. I'm not going like this and I'm saying in my head, okay, let's see. What is darker next, this Memento London Fog, or is it this one, you know? If you just kind of, I don't know, these indexing, but if you kind of know it, you can line them out. I wish I had a little bit of a darker gray in here that I can put in between these, but I don't. So I'll show you what I do for this grayscale using just straight black. Alright, but here it is, right here. We have things going from light to dark. Alright, now just think of it in terms of this, okay? Things that are lighter are going to be farther back in the distance. Things that are darker are going to be closer to us, okay? So you can kind of think about it in that standpoint. Now, there is no set color that you have to do these things in, but let's take a look at some scenes right here that I've already stamped out, okay? In most of these instances, I stamped out my main objects in black, okay? Black Lakeside Cove Lg, black pines and rocks, black overhanging branch, alright? And that's certainly a way that you can use that. Most people will utilize the stamps in that method, I don't know, most of the time, okay? But one of the things that we can do utilizing color, alright, is we can stamp out our imagery within those tones that we've chosen, okay, values instead of that. So, alright, so let's just take a look right here. Alright, we have the foreground imagery right here, and these reeds down here. Okay, those are stamped. Those are the things that are closest to us, okay? Where would this be in relation to these objects? It would be farther back, right? But what's farther back? Pines and rocks here? Or is it the Lakeside Cove? It'd be the pines and rocks, right? So I'm thinking near, farther, and farthest, okay? Now, I mean, these could be stamped out the same color, and these ones can be, but let's play around with these tones a little bit, and let's see what they look like. Okay, quarter size page card. And let's start off with this one right here. Let's say that this is, for our scene right here, I don't have like a mountain or something in the background here, so this is the thing that's the farthest away from us, okay? So I'm going to choose a color out of here, you know, that would represent something farther away. So I'm going to say, maybe I'll stamp this out in maybe this London Fog, okay? And maybe that Pines and Rocks will be stamped out in gray right here. And maybe the closest things could be stamped out in black. I don't know. Something like that. So let's test it and see. Now when I do this now, it's not going to be complete because I still have to do some things here to my scene. I have to color it utilizing those same colors for this to make sense, okay? If you just stamp out your imagery, oftentimes it doesn't really look like it makes sense, you know, because you have all these different things in these different colors, especially if you're using bright colors like sunset colors or something like that. So I'll show you how this all comes together through the coloring process, utilizing those same values for our color scheme. Okay, now this is going to represent a very foggy morning, I would say, out on the lake. I'm kind of wiping off the bottom of this right here because I want everything to be fairly light in here, okay? Okay, now, I don't know if this is going to be exactly that same gray that I just utilized because there was probably some black on this stamp, so I don't mind that. Okay, very pale impression in relation to that. All right, now going to stamp the pines and I tell you, I'm going to keep the pines and rocks this color. The London fog, I was saying I was going to use, I think I'm going to use that London fog for some background trees in here. And then we'll really try to push the distance. Alright. Alright, this one I can tell has quite a bit of black on it, so let's take off some of that ink so it doesn't stamp out too dark. I just use water to clean my stamps off. Okay, going back into the gray. This gray I would say is like a, I don't know, maybe a 35% gray in terms of the gray scale. 0 being white and 100% being black. It's about 30%, I would say. I wish I had a full range of grayscale in terms of my inks. I'll have to see if those are out there. Gray, of course, it's just not one of those real popular colors. I know that from selling pads for many years. Color certainly makes more of an emotional connection with people than something quite so neutral. But I think grayscale would do very well these days with kind of a, I don't know, very sophisticated stampers out there in terms of color and the utilization of different media and technology and whatnot. Alright, so 2 shades, well, it's 1 shade of gray. You see where I've overlapped it, it became much darker. Okay, but let's get some trees back here. Let's go for the London fog, okay? Or, I don't know, maybe I can do that Memento summer sky in blue back here. Let's try it in 2 different things. Let's go with, let's try the Memento first, maybe. Maybe I can do it in 2 different tones. Okay, I'm just going to utilize the trees of my pines and rocks. I'll be using the tops of them. Okay, now I need to mask off my rocks. I don't need to mask off the trees because hopefully this Memento is lighter than this Marvy gray, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so I'll mask off these white areas of the rocks, but the trees are solid, so you can just stamp right over them, and because you're stamping them in a lighter tone, hopefully it will read as something farther back in the distance, okay? Yeah, a little bit lighter. It's not too much lighter, but it's a little bit. Okay, but I do like the value and layering. Let's go for another one over here. Yeah, so those kind of lighter shades in the distance. It'd be better if there was a little bit more of a separation in terms of value, but that's not too bad. Go over here. Looks like I'm just doing the 1 tree. Okay. Alright, let's do, let's go for a color too. I have a feeling that Summer Sky Memento light blue will be the lightest hue. So, let's utilize this. I tell you what, this tree I'm going to remove that from the impressions, and I'll just go for these 2 lower ones that are roughly around the same height. Okay, I'll mask that off, and okay, very, very pale. See that? Let's go for another couple of those. This is a very, very pale impression in terms of value. Very light. Okay. Yeah, okay. So right there. Now if I want to, well, why not? Let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to create kind of these trees down here, a little bit of reflective type of situation in the water. Okay. Taking out that large one again. And we'll go for these a little bit smaller trees down here. Put a little bit of a reflective type of texturing in there, in that water area. Okay, something like that. I mean, it's very faint, and whether or not we could see it when we're done, I don't know. Maybe not, because I'm going to bring in a lot of this color into the scene. Alright, now this is going to come together very quickly once we get the coloring process going, because I'm really utilizing a very limited range of values here in the form of 3 different pads. Okay, I'm not really quite sure if I'll use the black yet, but maybe. Okay, so let's start off with our toning process. Okay, I'm just using, this is called the Color Box Stylus tool. You can sponge color in with various applicators of your choice. You can use daubers or whatever. But let's utilize this value scheme range in the order that we kind of arrange them in, starting with the lightest tone. Okay, if 2 colors are roughly the same value, you can't tell which one's lighter than the other, it doesn't matter then, use either one. Okay, now in the scene, when I start laying down this color, one of the things I always like to do is I like to retain some areas of light, and I like to darken other areas. Which ones you do, areas you do, is completely up to you, but just kind of oscillate it. Call it kind of checkerboarding your area, but just kind of the retention of some lights is going to be important in terms of just creating a varied surface. And for this look especially, it will kind of add to the overall atmosphere. Okay, now this is a very, very light color. Okay, Summer Sky is practically a shadow stamping ink. Okay, but in this first color here, really utilize a lot of your ink. Okay, now if it's not going on real dark, it's because it's very light. So if you're sponging on color, don't get frustrated and start scrubbing with your applicators and brushes, or whatever you're utilizing. Okay, just really build up your color, because you want to build up these colors, because we're going to be coming in with some darker colors after. So you're not just coloring with this one color, you're kind of soaking. Well, it's not really soaking, but you're bringing a certain degree of saturation into the scene. All right, now here's where I like to keep a little bit of light right down here. I like to kind of create a vignette. And one of the things I like to do often, and I have this video dedicated to this lighting scheme, it's called Easy Lighting Schemes, I believe. And there was an area of light in the sky and an area of light down below, and that's separated by a shadow. So it's not just one area of light. You can see it in all my different scenes here. We have light, dark, light. Light, dark, light. Light, dark, light. And this one's Aurora Borealis, but I don't know, I need a little bit of tone in there. But you can even see it, this one's a little bit lighter. Light, dark, light, right? So, is lighting kind of a complex idea? Well, it can be, you know, but it doesn't have to be. And I certainly don't do something very complex in terms of, you know, a quarter-page piece of paper right here. But here's where it, you know, here's where the variation takes place, okay? I have it darker on the outside right here, and it's usually darker somewhere in the middle, so it creates two areas of light. It kind of creates light and reflected light. That's what it represents. I don't have something as formal as a moon or a sun here that would say, okay, that's the light source. It's just kind of an area of light, and it's reflecting off something. And it doesn't have to be water. It could be the land, you know, the meadow or something like that. But here's where I do go in and I add my shadows, okay? I see a bunch of rocks and trees, so I'd like to add more tone in those areas, okay? Just in terms of getting a little bit more specific with my shadows and color application, or you can say kind of lighting definition through the use of color, okay? We're adding shadow, we're not adding light, but where you don't add the shadow and ink, okay, that will become light, all right? Now when you're utilizing very light values like this is where ink application becomes very easy too, okay? So the lighting scheme, you can make that into a very easy process. But this color addition, sometimes people, you know, have a hard time with that. They're getting kind of clunky additions, but here's the thing. If you start off with a light ink to begin with in your first color, okay, I can use the worst application technique possible, okay? But it's so light, it really doesn't, you know, do anything to, you know, kind of destroy your scene. Now, if I did this, you know, with black or something like that, it's going to leave these black oval shapes everywhere. But this is just a very pale blue, and I can just blend it right in because it's not too different from the background, okay? So just start light and make your life much, much easier, and I don't know. It's a good way to start off. That's if you're that's if you're kind of learning this technique here of color application and defining of light. Just start light, you know, and then work darker incrementally. Okay, I'm not taking a gigantic step between one color that's super light and going to black. All right. Now, my next color in my value range is this Memento London Fog. But we'd see it's already kind of creating a little bit of this kind of atmosphere in here. We have some imagery in the background that's becoming a little bit more obscure because you're running the same tone over it that you stamped the image in, okay? But that's all part of it. That kind of merges it together and it becomes something that's supposed to be representative of light, okay? So the definition of those objects that are stamped in those images, in those colors, become kind of just a part of the color scheme as opposed to a real definitive shape. So, in other words, what you stamp it out in, just color it with the same colors, you know, bring those colors right over the top of it, and it'll all come together. Alright, now as you move into your next colors, if you've kind of defined some areas of light, and you want to retain those areas of light, just don't tone those areas out, okay? Kind of hit your shadows. Hit your shadows with each color that you utilize in your color process, color layering process. Alright, so that's starting to come together. Alright, but now where it really comes together is when you utilize the ink that you stamped out your objects in. Now, the background already looks like it's kind of fading into the distance because I used those colors to already blend in, but where this will start to blend in really well is the utilization of Marvy Gray. That's the one that I stamped it in. Okay, this is really fun stuff. You can do these types of exercises in, if it's a sunset scene and you're doing reds and oranges and yellows, you know, you can stamp out your objects in reds and oranges or something like that. Depends how far in the distance it is. If you're stamping out clouds in the sky, maybe those ones are, you know, the farthest away, so you would stamp those ones out in a very light tone. Okay, really hitting my shadows here. I'm not putting on a full saturation of this color gray because there's, you know, there's some of those other colors still in my tip here. So it's not getting quite as dark, you know. I stamped out that tree in this Marvy Gray, but look at, I'm adding a lot of that gray to that area. But look at how much darker that tree is than the color I'm trying to apply, okay? It's because the ink from those previous two colors is kind of saturate that area, so in trying to apply more color, it's kind of achieved a super saturation, so this color isn't going on very quickly. It's not being absorbed into it. Alright, but that helps us though in the blending process. It goes on very smoothly this way because I'm kind of stamping or tapping wet into wet. Okay, so a lot of the color is just coming right back off onto this tip area. That's good in a way because it makes the color application seem much smoother like that. But it does make things go a little bit slower. I mean, you can heat set this or something like that if you want to, but I prefer not to do that. I prefer to, you know, utilize the dampness of this surface right here. I mean, it's not damp to the touch. I can put my fingers over it. It's not coming off of my fingers, but the surface of the page is becoming a little bit more moist, and the pulp of the paper is the thing that's kind of building up a lot of color in there, or a lot of moisture in there, so it's just the surface isn't quite as accepting very quickly, but you can really blend your colors on nicely, okay? But anyways, you can see it's starting to come together really nicely now. Doesn't it look like kind of light and fog and atmosphere in here? Okay, let me try to hit these shadows a little bit more. Now, just doing this and talking about kind of this drying aspect, doing this right now, I mean, it just took like a minute, but I can see it's starting to get darker and darker because these two previous colors, I think, are kind of drying and setting up. But look at that heavy atmosphere. I've done these in things where I've stamped out objects in orange and hot pinks and whatever, and it really looks kind of bizarre, you know, for most of the coloring process until you get to the darker tones in it where it brings everything together. So sometimes you'll be doing this and you'll be bringing in all these colors, you know, that you stamped your objects in, and the brighter they are, the more it kind of stands out and the stranger it looks until you get through the entire thing, and then it makes sense. It represents lighting in your scene, and it looks more like lighting than orange trees in the distance or something like that. Okay, I'm kind of adding in some streaks with this just to give it a little bit more atmosphere and surface, so I'm doing something like this. With my tool, I have it on its side, and I'm just going to bring it in like that. Okay. Have that. See that kind of depth right in here? And you have these tones being brought in. All right. Now, do I want to go all the way to black? It just depends what objects, what color I stamp my objects in the foreground in. Let's do this. Let's create a little bit of depth in the foreground itself. And I've done this on the other videos too, but let's go with gray for these reeds, and then I'll do the reeds again, maybe in a darker color. I probably will go to black. I'm thinking I might want to go to black right now and just add a little bit of this kind of vignette edge here. Okay, watch me I'm just staying in that one corner. Okay, and I'm bringing that in like so. I'm just staying in that one corner. Okay, then I move on to my next corner. Okay, and that's how I get a nice smooth transition using the darkest tone that I will use, which is black. Okay, so in other words, I'm not trying to get all four corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, in one inking, okay? You really want to kind of work it. Like that. Okay. Adding a little bit more here to make that transition a little bit more smooth. Okay. Tapping it down in the shadows here. This side over here is a lot more kind of shadow area, so maybe I'll utilize a little bit more over here because it's right next to the pines and rocks. And I create a little bit more of a stronger vignette there, okay? To kind of contain everything. Alright, let's utilize our reeds. About 3 impressions right there. And we'll do the same over here. It's barely visible over here on the left side. Look how beautiful that is in terms of the atmosphere. You know, not doing everything in your dark tone or just in black. Alright, well, let's go to black. I tell you what, here's what I was talking about, utilizing black for just different shades. You can always kind of ghost stamp something. Let's see how dark it'll be on the second impression. Okay, so stamp it out using the second impression. Yeah, that looks pretty good. It's not super black. Blot it off. So I'm getting some version of gray, maybe a 70%, I don't know, something like that. Gray. Go for the third and fourth impression, I don't know. You can see that right there. So we have some depth in the foreground using what? We're using our color scheme that we've established, okay? So that's a way you can kind of establish a little bit of depth, and again, it's just kind of really a micro area in terms of the whole. In terms of that concept of depth through value, here's a very small area where you're utilizing that kind of notion or process of defining space. How will that look up here? I don't know if I want to go for too much. It's getting a little busy up there. I think I'll just go for one value of this branch up top. I think. I don't know. We'll see. Alright, let's blot that off a little bit and get that up there. think I could stand to go a little bit darker up top. Let's see. This is the oak branch, by the way. Previous one was called Reed's Large. Okay. Here we go. So the idea is that we're trying to define deep space, right? It has a little bit of a different feel, doesn't it? This one looks like it's more, there's more atmosphere and fog or whatever in that one. This one seems a little bit more up close, but maybe that needed that, you know, that kind of contrast in this one, you know, to really make that sky pop out. In this one, it's kind of more about kind of this light, you know, diffused light reflecting off the distant objects and coming back towards her eye. Maybe there's more fog and moisture in the air in this one. You know, the air is kind of still. Okay, but that is that. Now, one of the things that I can really enhance the scene with is the use of some pigment ink, okay? Really utilizing some kind of a frosty kind of methods or looks, appearances in here, actually applying some, you know, additive types of light. Foggy takes within the scene using these little cotton swabs, and that's what I'll do. But let's just do this for right now, and I'll be doing the finishing work in a later video. But anyway, just utilizing color right now and value to create that extra depth. It has a different feel to it, doesn't it? You know, I always say that when we kind of depict something within kind of a landscape scene like this, and when you do things in various values like that, it makes the viewer kind of a little bit more aware of the space in between the objects, okay? The space in between that background tree and this foreground or midground, Lakeside Cove, and the fact that that's lighter than this right here in the foreground, it makes us a little bit more of this, what's happening in the space between that and this. I don't mean this linear space right here, but, you know, the space that's represented in between this. What we're trying to convey is the fog in between that area back there and us as the viewer up here, making that object in the distance seem lighter in relation. So just like if we saw a pine tree right next to us and a pine tree 1 mile away, if they were the exact same color and value up close, the one in the distance is probably going to look lighter, you know, provided the same light is shining on both trees. It'll look lighter because there's dust in the air, whatever, and that light being reflected off, it's bouncing off all these little particles of dust and moisture in the air. By the time it gets to our eyeball, it looks lighter. Alright, so anyways, yeah, I can't wait to use some pigment inks and such on here, and I don't know, I have these various shades of gray. I can get a little bit more specific in hitting some of these shadows in here, I think, utilizing this grayscale. Values, alcohol pens, and maybe even a little touch of some lighting in here using some white gel pens on things like my rocks and whatnot, or in the background trees in there. But those are the things that I think will kind of bring this to life even more so. Okay? Anyways, hope you enjoy this process here, or scene. And I encourage you to really try out that value scale to convey depth within your pieces. It could just be one thing. You could just stamp out everything gray or black and just stamp, you know, the trees or something like that in a lighter color that you plan on coloring your background with, okay? Alright, fun stuff. Thanks for watching. Thanks as always for tuning into the channel. If you have any questions, check us out at stampscapes.com or drop me a note in the comment section of this video.